Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. Today we will be discussing moving positively through change. My name is Patrick Allen and I am the Program Manager for Kent State's Center for Corporate and Professional Development's Public Open Enrollment Programs. Our center specializes in providing employee development for partnering organizations in Northeast Ohio and around the country. We offer training as public open enrollment programs delivered in Independence, Ohio, and also on-site customized programs delivered at your location. I am joined today by Kent State facilitator Christy Frieden. I will be serving as your host, and Christy will be our presenter for today. Christy specializes in motivating, training, and coaching professionals, executives, and physicians in the area of leadership, change, customer service, emotional intelligence, and employee engagement. She has over 17 years of healthcare management experience, most recently working for a Cleveland hospital as a manager of performance management and then as an organizational and performance development specialist. Her background includes extensive facilitator training with GE Healthcare Solutions as it relates to selecting, developing, coaching, evaluating, and promoting top performers. She recently obtained the Developing Leadership through Emotional Intelligence certificate from Case Western Reserve's Weatherhead School of Management. Frieden holds a bachelor's degree from Slippery Rock University and a master's from West Virginia University in vocational counseling. Christy's passion and dynamic presentation style, as well as her down-to-earth attitude, engages and motivates her audiences to focus on their strengths and achieve personal and professional success. Everyone in attendance today has been muted to avoid background noise from any of the over 300 registered participants. We do encourage you to ask questions at any point during the hour. You can submit your questions in writing using the control panel on the right side of your screen. I will present your questions to the presenter as time permits throughout the webinar. There is also a handout available to you that summarizes today's presentation. It is located under the Handouts tab on the control panel. We encourage you to download it and take notes during today's presentation. We are recording today's webinar, and you will receive an email with a link to the recording after we conclude our time together. Before we begin, I would like to start by asking a question of you, the audience. How is change handled in your organization? I'll give you about a minute to answer this question, and then I will show the results. Okay, as we see, it looks like B is the overall winner there with analyzed by the department and area most impacted. Okay, so with that being said, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Christy Frieden.
Stress. So how do we manage our stress during change? And then developing our role as a change agent. If you're a leader in the organization or you're an individual contributor in an organization, how do you help others move through change? Not only yourself, but help others move through change. So taking a look at that polling question and the answers to it. So oftentimes in an organization, just the area most impacted is the one that is potentially looked at, and then however the other areas are impacted, it just, it will be what it will be. And so that can be a struggle sometimes for the other departments when we feel like our organization hasn't totally looked at all aspects of the change and then communicated it effectively. So we're going to go through all of that today. Before we get into the different models and ideas related to change, I do want to set the stage here first and talk about the difference between change and transition, because there is a difference. Oftentimes, we'll talk about change looking at through the idea of change, but transition is also a part of it. And throughout this webinar, I will be using these words interchangeably, but I do want to tell you kind of the subtle difference between the two. So change is situational. It's external and can happen very quickly. And what I mean by that is, we get a new job, we start a new diet and exercise program, we walk in, we have a new boss. So these are external to us, and they are situational. Transition, on the other hand, is the psychological process that people go through to come to terms with this new situation. So transition is internal, and change is external. So transition can take time. People need to go through this to accept change. Oftentimes, as leaders, we think we can make people change, but it is really what we're referring to is that whole idea of transition and getting people on board and bought in psychologically. So there's things that we have to be paying attention to in order to get people to do that. So we can make that change happen very quickly, but that psychological process is what we need to be paying attention to and need to recognize that people need some time to do that. So when we look at the phases of transition and people kind of accepting what's happening, there are three phases. The first is that current phase where we need to let go of what's happening. We recognize that something new is coming. So it's that ending state, or letting go or losing something. Then we move into that temporary state in the middle, which can be very confusing. We're in between. We are still doing a little bit of the old. Maybe we're building the new. So there can be a lot of confusion and frustration in the temporary state. And then finally, we get to the future state where we gather that new understanding. We have a new identity, a new attitude about what's happening. When I think about these phases of transition, I like to utilize the metaphor of a trapeze. So just to think about this for a second, let's say my boss tells me, all right, Christy, in order to be successful in this organization, you got to climb up that 50-foot tower, you need to swing across, and you need to land on the other side, and that's what, this is required of you. So I'm like, all right. As I'm climbing up the tower, what could be going through my mind at the time? I could be saying things like, why are they making me do this? This is awful. I'm afraid. I don't want to do this. It's terrible. As I'm standing there waiting, so I'm in the current state. I'm not happy about what they're making me do. I'm waiting for that bar to swing my way. So lots going through my mind. Now, as the bar swings my way, I take a leap off the platform. I grab the bar. Now I am swinging in midair. I'm in the temporary state. Now, what could be going through my mind? A lot of different things. I could be thinking, I'm going to fall. This is terrible. I never want to do this again. I could also be thinking positive things like, wow, this isn't too bad. I'm proud of myself. This is great. So I'm in the temporary state. And then I finally swing to the other side, land in the future state. I'm on the platform. What could I be thinking to myself? Oh, I made it. thank goodness, that wasn't so bad, or, I never want to do this again, or why did they make me do this? Essentially, I'm landed on the future state. So why I bring this up is because oftentimes, if you think about the change that's happening in your organization, you have probably heard people say those types of comments. And so even with this little metaphor on the trapeze, even when it's a good change, we still struggle with it. And an indication that people, they have different feelings, different perspectives about the change as it's happening. You need to be paying attention to some of those comments. And even if it's a good change, it can still be scary because it's ultimately us just doing something different. We're creatures of habit. We don't like to necessarily change our behavior or change what we're doing because it's hard. But even if it's a positive change in the end, it still requires that psychological process that people need to go through. So I do want to share that with you, and I want you to keep that in mind. If you are a leader in your organization, or I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in the webinar, but if you're a leader, just keep that whole idea in mind, that psychological process. Okay, so how do we handle change most effectively? So I think it involves our mindset regarding the change as it's happening, and this can be very challenging. But to give you an example of what I'm talking about, if you were to think back on a significant challenge that you had in your life, when you think back at that time, how did you overcome the challenge and what did you learn from it? Oftentimes when I have people do this exercise in my class, what I find is that, people realize how strong they are. They learn how adaptable and flexible they are. They learn that, they can learn something new or do something different. They're proud of themselves. And when you reflect back on it, at the time, it's awful. I can think of very specific changes in my life where at the time I'm like, oh, this is terrible. But as I reflect back on it, I realize how I grew from the situation. And so the sooner we can get there, the better. When you look at the whole idea of change, it really depends on your mindset. Are you looking at it as a threat? Sure, it can be adversity, challenge. It can even be a crisis. Are you looking at it as a threat, or are you looking at it as an opportunity? It really is how we perceive it, what we're telling ourselves, and then how we respond to it that makes all the difference. So the sooner you can get to the whole idea of, hey, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity that's presenting itself, the better. And so how do we do that? So listed in your handout, or the handout that was provided to you here, or can be, you'll see these questions. When you think about being adaptable or being a change agent in your organization, adaptable people focus on opportunity, not the adversity or the threat. It's more, they're focusing more on the opportunity, and the sooner you can get to that, the better. So questions like, what can I learn from this? How can I grow wiser, stronger, better because of it? What are the opportunities that this change presents? What do I want to achieve? Oftentimes looking at what's in it for me. What do I want to achieve and how can I do that? So more personal empowerment and taking a look at it from, what can you get out of it? And then what positive actions do I need to take? Instead of letting the change happen to you, you can think in terms of, what actions can I take to get the best out of this situation? Because obviously change is going to happen. It happens at a very fast pace nowadays. I seem to be doing more and more change type of classes. It seems to be something that's requested because change is moving at such a fast pace in today's world in our organizations.
Okay, at this time we are going to launch our second poll question. How is change perceived in your organization? Again, we'll give you about a minute and then we'll show the results. Okay, well, it looks like the overwhelming response is B, somewhat positively, but some misunderstanding about why.
Okay, excellent. So, yes, so that's good that it's somewhat positively viewed or perceived. It's rarely, oftentimes, is welcomed because, again, change is hard. And then that third one, I've heard that a lot, oftentimes in organizations when I'm there, that they just change things for change's sake. It's too much. We can't handle it. People get just burnt out because of all of the change. But I think when you look at the polling results there, so we do know why it's important, but maybe more communication is necessary. And oftentimes as leaders, we fall short of communicating everything and being as transparent as possible. So communication is key. So looking at how we perceive change, we have to take a look at ourselves. Change can cause a lot of stress. And again, it really comes down to our perception of it. But no matter our perception, it requires us to do something different, maybe something we don't understand, something we haven't quite mastered yet, some knowledge we need to acquire. So I want to talk to you a little bit about stress and share with you a model on how to handle stress or think of it stressful situations a little bit differently. So when you take a look at stress in itself isn't always bad. There is good stress, and that is when we think about gearing up to do something, giving a presentation, participating in some type of sports or doing something where it's something new that we're maybe going to be evaluated on. It's okay. Stress does something for us. It gets us geared up for a challenge. It gives you energy. All right. When you think about the whole idea of flow, where we're in a situation where we're working on something or doing something and time goes by so quickly because we're just totally immersed in the situation, that's when our level of stress meets our level of competence. So it feels good. I mean, you're performing at a high level and it feels good. And that's what flow is. So flow actually does involve stress. Now, the problem becomes when we take a look at bad stress or chronic stress. This is where we are constantly feeling a certain level of stress, and this is what leads to burnout, that our body doesn't have time to recover because we are always feeling, even if it's just a small level of stress, it doesn't let our body recover, and so what happens is we feel exhausted. It sucks the energy out of us, and so this is where it can really be a problem. So when I think about society today, oftentimes we're never really, yes, technology is wonderful, but oftentimes we're we're never really disconnected from our work situation. We're always, because we have that cell phone there, we can check our emails. We're constantly connected, not only to our work situation, but the world around us and maybe some of the challenges going on just in the world. But so we're constantly feeling a level of stress, and so that can lead to burnout. So what is stress? Stress is when, we have a certain level of reality and then there are expectations put upon us, and that gap in there is what can cause us stress. Now, the important thing that when we take a look at expectations is, yes, we have expectations of the job we're doing, or in our family life, relationships that we have, responsibilities that we have on a daily basis. So expectations are put upon us by others, but it is worth considering how much stress you put on yourself because of your own personal expectations, the expectation of perfection, of being everything to everyone. So taking a look at where those expectations come from, and maybe looking at yourself and realize, what, I have maybe expected, I don't want to fail, or I don't want to make a mistake. And oftentimes the expectations we put upon ourselves can be a challenge, especially for perfectionists or a little bit of a control. Have a little bit of, want to control situations. So that can be a struggle. The other thing I would say about that is make sure you're clarifying and setting others' expectations of you. And what I mean by that is when someone's, for example, your boss wants you to do an assignment or something like that, make sure you're being clear on what they can expect from you. So something like saying, clarifying priorities. Okay, so obviously this is your top priority now. These are a list of the other things that I'm doing currently. What can I put lower on the list so I can address this particular priority you have of me now? And then also clarifying, by when, when do you need this? What will it look like, or what you are expecting it to be when it's completed? So just make sure you're clarifying expectations and setting the expectations of others when you are going about your work. So I'm going to share with you a model now related to how we can better handle stress, or at least think about it a little differently. So what I'd like you to do right now, and I'm just going to give you a second, if you have paper and pen handy, I just want you to list out all of your worries, concerns, frustrations, and stressors. So right now, if you could just take a moment to list out everything that you have going on right now, and I'll give you a moment. Okay, I don't want to give you too much time, because then you'll go on and on with all your stressors, worries, frustrations, and stressors. So I'm glad you're able to come up with a couple of them. So I'm going to share with you this model. And it's important that as I go through this, I want you to figure out where these stressors that you have written down fall into. This is a great way of thinking about, where do I want to spend my emotional energy, or where do I want to, how do I want to think about some of the stressors and concerns I have going on? So as you take a look at the center of the model, the target there, that green area, this is your sphere of control. So when you think of what you have control over, who or what you have control over, The answer is you, yourself, nobody else. You don't have control over anyone but yourself. And even having control of yourself can be challenging. So you see that big bag of Cheetos in the pantry, you know you probably shouldn't eat them, but you eat them anyway. So even controlling ourselves can be a challenge. When we think about ourselves and what we have control over, it's our behavior, our thoughts, how we respond to situations, our work ethic, how we handle other people, challenging people. This is what we have control over. We have full control over ourselves. Now, we take a look at the yellow going out to the next sphere. This is your sphere of influence. So who or what do we have influence over? Essentially, we have influence over anyone that we would interact with, all right? Anyone that we would interact with. And depending on if you're a leader in an organization, you may have influence over certain policies, certain procedures, certain situations. So we don't control other people, but we may have some influence over them. And the more respect or trust you have built in a relationship, ideally, the more influence that you have. So as the whole idea of influence can be a webinar in itself, but when we take a look at influencing strategies, how do we influence other people? Think about, just think about how do you influence your kids? There can be reward and recognition for behavior that we want to see. There can also be consequences. If someone does something that you don't like, there can be consequences to that. Think about, you can be influential with people being a role model to them, doing the behavior that you want them to do. You can influence people by facts and data and information. You can also influence people by stories, tapping into their emotions. So these are all different ways of influence. And when you're thinking about if people aren't doing what you want them to do, instead of trying to control them, you have to think about, maybe I should change my influencing strategy, that what I am doing with this person is not working and I need to change my influencing strategy. But ultimately, you can't control them. We can just try to influence them in doing what we want them to do. And then finally, on the outside in the red sphere, that's our sphere of concern, or like I say, no control. So we're concerned about it, but we absolutely have no control over it. And so who or what falls in here, that is everything else. The traffic, the weather, whether we get downsized or bought out, whether our employee doesn't show up that day, whether we get a new boss. These are all things that fall in our sphere of concern that we do not have any control over. Now, what I would like you to do is think about, where do all of your worries, concerns, frustrations, stressors fall into? It's an excellent exercise to do, because here's the thing. If there are things that fall in your sphere of concern, you just need to let those go. And oftentimes we worry about things that we have absolutely no control over. And the sooner we can let that stuff go, the better. Now, things that maybe fall in your sphere of influence. This can be tricky because maybe you have influence or can have some potential influence over the influencers. There may be ways that you can influence a situation, so you would need to look thoroughly through the situation to figure that out. But ultimately, if we want to feel empowered, if we want to feel good about a situation, we need to focus on what we can control. And that is, again, it may be just our mindset, how we think about a situation, that can help us to feel better about it. So, this is a easy model to bring to mind. I'll give you an example. several years ago. I don't know, I was around the house doing something and I felt myself kind of going off the rails, worried about whether my daughter was going to be on this volleyball team with this bully girl. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, what if she's on this team with this bully, and how am I going to handle it, and how's she going to handle it? It's going to be awful. And then honestly, I brought this model to mind and recognized she hasn't even made the team yet. Okay, what am I doing? So that's when this model can really come in handy, when we feel like we're losing it a little bit, getting so worried or upset about something that absolutely we have no control over. And so it's easier to let it go when we've identified those things. So keep that in mind. Additionally, there's just some basic techniques for relieving stress, which I'm sure you have heard at some point along the way, but just it's a good reminder. Utilizing that power of positive attention, paying attention to what's going well, what's working instead of what's not working, because you're going to get more of what you pay attention to. And so paying attention to what's working is important. Also maintaining that learner mindset. Going back to those questions about adaptable people and what they think about. They think about how they can learn and grow and develop instead of feeling victimized. Getting the proper sleep, that's important. That healthy diet, certainly exercise. Meditation, it's one of those things where it can permanently rewire your brain. If you really feel like you're stressed and out of sorts, meditation, it does take some practice, but there are a lot of good apps out there to help in this particular area. One of them that I use is called Headspace. And so it's a really great way of getting into the practice of meditation. And then I'm sure there's many others. One of them for me particularly is petting my dog or spending time with my dog. So pets, people that you love, just spending time connecting with others. And I'm sure there's many others, but I just wanted to share with you a couple of those things. Okay. So we're going to move on now to talking about the whole idea of change and accountability, and I want to share with you some models about, as we look to help people in our organizations get on board with change. So the first thing, let me go back here. I want to share with you here two different definitions of accountability. The one from Webster's dictionary definition, that subject having report, explain, justify, being answerable or responsible, which is something that we're familiar with as we think about the whole idea of accountability. But if you take a look at the next one, this is from the book, The Oz Principle. That book has been around for a while, but it's really a great book talking about accountability. So what do they say? A personal choice to rise above one's circumstance, demonstrate the ownership necessary for achieving the desired result. Essentially, to see it, to own it, to solve it, to do it. As you take a look at these two definitions, what are the differences? First of all, as you look at the first one, it's more reactive after the fact, after things already happened. Now I've got to justify what happened, or I have to, explain. Where the second one is more proactive. It's looking at what can I do to impact, taking more personal responsibility. And so when we're thinking about the people in our organizations and what we want from them, we want them to make that choice. We want them to be accountable and be on board with whatever change that we have. So I want to share with you this accountability ladder. This is another great model, not only to think about yourself and where you are in change, but also if you're a leader, people that you supervise or people that you work with, that might give you a better idea of where they may be. So let me explain the model. As I'm going through it, I want you to think about where you are in relation to change that you have going on in your organization, and maybe the people that you work with and where they may be. So the first on the very bottom of this ladder. So in any type of a change that happens in an organization, people fall somewhere on this ladder. So the first rung on the ladder, number one, there is someone who is unaware of the situation. Now, this may be someone who is brand new to the organization, doesn't know that we've done it differently before. It may be someone who's out on medical leave or on leave, on vacation or something, doesn't realize this has happened. I guess it could be someone who's completely clueless, maybe, but essentially this is a person who is simply unaware that the change is happening. Going up the ladder now, number two is a person who is in blaming mode. And this person says something like, if it wasn't for my new boss, I wouldn't be having to put, all this extra effort in what I'm doing. If it wasn't for this new initiative that we've got going on, we wouldn't have to be, spending so much time doing all this extra work. Essentially blaming everyone and everything for their situation. So not taking responsibility. Number three is a person who is rationalizing. The person who says something like, you know what, I've been working here for 20 years and it's worked out just fine. I'm not about to do anything different now. I'm not about to make the change now. What I'm doing is working and it's just fine. Sometimes I hear people say retired on the job. So people who've been in a place for a long time and they're really resistant to doing anything different. And then number four, going up the ladder, that is the hope it goes away. So the person who just says, you know what, if we just wait long enough, they'll change their mind and we won't have to do it. Going back to that second question of how change is perceived in your organization, sometimes it's that flavor of the month that can happen and people just get overloaded with change. At one point I was observing customer service in one of the roles that I was in formerly, and I remember someone saying to me, because we were trying to implement a new customer service program, and so I was observing people, and the lady said, oh, this too shall pass, and I'm like, no, this is not going to pass. Just because I walk away doesn't mean that you have to go back to doing it the old way. So this is the hope it goes away, people. So 1 through 4 are victim positions. And in this model, we need to get at least to 5. All right. 5 is acceptance that the change is actually happening and going forward. So at least accepting that it's happening. 6 is then looking for my role in it. What is my role in making sure that this change is successful? Going up the ladder, 7 is the person who looks for solutions. So in all change that goes on, there can be challenges, there can be conflict, and this is a person who is looking for the solutions to that. And then 8 is the person who just does it. 8 is the person who is on board, change agent, moving it forward, and working through it. So 5 through 8 are proactive positions, and we want to get people to at least 5. So it's an interesting model to utilize. And so the question becomes then, how do we know if we are below the line or people that we work with are below the line? So just a couple of...
Sorry, Christy, to interrupt, but we did have a question come in about the accountability ladder. So before you move on to the next subject, the question is, can you use the accountability ladder model during a one-on-one coaching session?
Oh, yes. Actually, I highly recommend using a ladder for a one-on-one coaching session. When you really want to have an honest conversation about why someone may be not on board with the change initiative or not doing what they need to be doing, this model, you can just show people the model. Hey, here's the model. Where do you think you are on here? And how can I help you get above the line? Or what are things that we can do together? What are things you need to do? Or what can I do to help you to move above the line? So yes, this really is effective in one-on-one conversations when you really want to know why someone is struggling with whatever change you've got going on. So that's a great question. And so continuing to talk about this accountability ladder, how do you know if you may be below the line or others are below the line? And so I just have a couple comments about that. So here's how you may know or recognize if you're below the line or others. So you feel captive or lack control of your present circumstances. You find yourself blaming others and pointing fingers. Your discussions focus more on what you cannot do rather than what you can do. You find yourself being sought out by others so they can tell you what someone else did to them this time. That's a very interesting one. If you're the person people come to complain and commiserate about the horrible situation you all have going on in the work environment, you may be feeding into the situation. So just be careful of that. You feel you're being treated unfairly and you don't think there's anything you can do about it. And then the last one, you spend a lot of time talking about things you cannot change. So essentially all of these things are victim mode. So if you're find yourself there or others are there, these are ways that you recognize that you may be below the line. And then another way to recognize if you are below the line or others are some excuses that maybe you have heard before. So here are some of the excuses that are common that may be an indication that you're below the line. That's the way we've always done it. It's not my job. I didn't know you needed it right away. It's not my fault. That's not my department. No one told me what to do. I'm waiting for approval. I don't know. I forgot. I'm too busy to do it. Nobody invited to the meeting, and nobody's followed up with me, so it can't be that important. Now, let's be honest. How many people, first of all, how many of you have heard these things before? I'm sure you've heard these things throughout your work life or career. But really, the question also is, how many of you have said some of these things before? And I'm certain we all have said these things now and then. But the way that you can identify if you're below the line is if you find yourself saying these things all the time, okay? If you're saying these things all the time, you may be below the line. If you're hearing these things all the time, that also may be an indication that people are below the line. If these are your go-to comments, then it's an indication that you may be below the line. So be careful of that and watch out for that. So the question then becomes, if you are below the line or if others are below the line, how do you get yourself above the line? And these are just, again, these are provided in your handout, questions to consider or questions to ask others to try to get people above the line. Focusing on what's within your control, very, very important. So that's where you're empowered, where when you think about being a victim, then you're disempowered, and that's not good. What brings you here every day? Why do you come here every day? What is working for you? Again, that power of positive attention. What are your strengths? Utilizing your strengths is really helpful in overall satisfaction of life. So identifying those strengths and utilizing them. What do you enjoy? What do you enjoy about your job, the work you do, the people you work with, the organization you are part of? And then the last one, what is holding you back? What is it that causes you to be or feel like you are below the line? So these are great, again, when you're talking about one-on-one one-on-one coaching situations or just one-on-one meetings that you may have with some of your employees. These are great questions to ask because it shifts the mindset a little bit, and it can be helpful. As we talk about coaching people above the line, there is a process to do that. If you feel like someone is below the line, how do you get people above the line? Well, the first thing you need to do is to listen. So listen to try to understand the situation that the person is going through. Number 2, acknowledge what they are saying. Acknowledge maybe the feeling behind it. Acknowledge what they're saying to try to get them to recognize that you acknowledge their situation. Now, the key here is, does acknowledge mean you agree? And it does not mean you agree. Just to acknowledge someone, their perspective, their emotions that they're experiencing doesn't necessarily mean you agree, and that's really, really important. Third, and this is most important, is to ask. And what I mean by ask is a question that goes something like this. So given your current circumstance, what else can you do to move forward? This is what shifts the mindset, or shifts the responsibility from victim mode to proactivity. So given your current circumstance, your situation, I recognize it can be challenging, but what can you do? What else can you do to move forward? And that's important. Provide feedback then. As you know, maybe you're the supervisor, provide them feedback on what they could be doing or how they could be doing it, and then committing to the next steps, the actions that they're going to be taking, the actions that you're going to be taking as a supervisor to get them above the line. So this is just a nice 5-step process in getting people to shift their mindset from victim mode to being proactive. Okay, so other ways when we think about getting people above the line, just a couple other comments I have about this. Making sure you're connecting what they do to the organization's desired result. So, why is it important for them to show up every day and put in their best effort to do a great job? Why are they important to your organization? The next, create that vision and purpose in their lives that motivates them personally. Find out what motivates them. A great way of doing that is to ask a question about their career. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What are your career goals? And someone might say, I want to be in a leadership position. Great. Then you have an idea of what to help them with. Or they may say, I just want to stay in this job till I retire. And you know what? Great. That's fine too. Then you help them to grow and develop within their current role. But a career goal question is wonderful when you're trying to get to the heart of what motivates them. Setting expectations at every level. Make sure the expectations are set. Make sure people know what the expectations are of them. And then lastly, reward above the line behavior. When you see people talking and behaving above the line, making comments that are positive, proactive, above the line, make sure you're acknowledging. I'm not saying throw a party for people like that. I mean, when you think about someone who maybe struggles below the line, and then that one day they're in a meeting and they make a positive comment about what's going on, acknowledge that. Acknowledge the behavior that you want to continue. So recognize and reward above the line behavior. Okay, let's talk a little bit about now resistance and how and why people resist, and then how do we overcome it. So why do people resist? There are essentially 4 different ideas about this. First of all, they don't know what's expected of them, so expectations aren't clear. They don't know how, so they don't know how to do what you want them to do. Something's getting in their way, and they don't want to. So if you take a look at these 4 items, what's the most difficult to manage? And the obvious answer is that they don't want to. Okay, so that's challenging. But the reason I bring this up is because oftentimes when you're looking at people and they appear to be resistant to change, we may automatically jump to the conclusion that they don't want to, but it's important that you really go back to these other areas and think them through before you jump to that conclusion. Maybe they don't know what's expected of them. Maybe they aren't clear with the expectations. Maybe they don't know how, and they're too proud to say they don't know how, or they don't, they haven't quite got the hang of the new system or process you've got going on. Maybe something is getting in their way, and you think about that. There can be a variety of things, whether it's supplies, equipment, that type of thing, or it can be other individuals, coworkers, colleagues. Maybe there's an issue, an interpersonal issue between two colleagues. So make sure before you just jump to the conclusion that they just don't want to, or they're just being, stubborn. I want you to reflect on some of these other areas because it may shed some light on why an individual could be resisting. As you look at overcoming resistance, and we're getting close to the end here, but I want to just share a couple of ways to overcome resistance. The first one is communicate, communicate, communicate. Even if you think you've communicated it enough, keep on doing it in all different ways, because people, depending on their own experience, their own situation or circumstance, people want to hear it in different ways. So continually communicate. Don't think that you announce the new initiative and you say, hey, is there any questions? And nobody raises their hand. You think, great, glad everybody's on board. That's not necessarily the case. So continue to communicate. The next one is to look at what's helping and hindering the change. In your handout, I have provided some tools for you. The helping hindering exercise is really important as you're planning for a change, thinking about what's helping the change to move forward and what could be potentially hindering the change. That's an important exercise to think through. The whole WIFM thing, the handout provides you a gains and losses exercise to think about either individuals or groups of people, what potentially are they going to lose with the change and what can they gain. These are all really important talking points to figure out before you go introduce the new initiative, so you can answer their questions and their concerns. Threats versus opportunities, that's another great exercise to do, and this can be done in real time. I just yesterday worked with a group who was implementing a new performance evaluation that they weren't even ready for or knew anything about. And what I did first was, with this group, did a threats versus opportunities matrix, and it got people on board very, very quickly. Notice the question: threats if we don't do this, or opportunities if we do. So this can be a real exercise, real-time exercise. Certainly give your resistors a part to play. If they are the most knowledgeable, if they have the most experience, give them a part to play to help them recognize that they're an important part of the change, and then empathize. And lastly, I do want to say, before I am able to take your questions here, as when you think about empathizing and going back to what I talked about initially, the whole idea of transition is the marathon effect. Now, I've never run a marathon, but why this is called the marathon effect is oftentimes in a marathon, depending on where you qualify, certain groups of people get to start first, and you start in have different start times. Well, that oftentimes means that there's certain people that get to the end quicker, and then there are others that come along after. When you think about a change initiative in your organization, if you're a leader, you have already gone through the phases of transition before you even announce the new initiative. So you have psychologically worked through all the benefits and why this is so important and how this is going to fit in your life. When you introduce it to your group, recognize they're at the starting line, psychologically at the starting line. So you need to do the best that you can to empathize and work with them so they can go through that transition to get bought in and get to where you are. But you have to give them time to do it, and you have to be able to communicate and answer the questions that they need to know. So that's what I'd like to say about that. Again, all of the tools that I just mentioned, I know it was quick, but they are in your handout, and they are very great tools to help communicate a change in your organization. So hopefully now you know a little bit more about the change process, looking at how you can better handle or manage stress, and then how you can become a change agent or improve your role as a change agent in your organization. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christy. We do have a couple minutes for some questions. One that came in is, What if it is the supervisor who is below the line?
Oh, well, that's a great question. Well, here's the thing. Going back to control, influence, and concern, it depends on the situation and circumstance. But if you have a relationship with a supervisor, and hopefully you do, what are different influencing strategies you can utilize with that person to try to get them on board. But what it boils down to basically for you as an individual is focusing on when you can control, keeping a positive attitude yourself, trying to, look at the opportunity it presents for you, and just try to let go of some of that stuff that you can't control at all and try to be as influential as you can with that person.
Okay, I think we got time for maybe one more. What if I don't know what is expected of me, but my supervisor refuses to tell me what's expected of me because, in their words, I've been here long enough to know?
Well, that's not a very good supervisor. I would continue to ask. I mean, maybe jot out or think about what you feel your expectations are, and then see if you can meet with this person and see if there's any discrepancies. And then if you maybe have them clearly written out, you can have a more concrete conversation about those things. But I would continue to ask for sure.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we are running out of time. And that does conclude our time together. If you would like to learn more about today's topic, we encourage you to contact us about bringing this program on site to your location. We are able to tailor all of our programs to fit your needs. You can contact us at 330-672-3416 or at yourtrainingpartner@kent.edu. I also encourage you to visit our website to see our upcoming open enrollment program, including Christy's Understanding Emotional Intelligence to Increase Your Effectiveness and her program, Effective Organizational Leadership, Engage and Execute. Those programs are delivered at the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio in Independence. You can see a registration link on your screen. I do encourage you to register soon as these programs routinely fill. You can also join our extensive list of clients and bring Kent State to your organization. We also encourage you to register for our next webinar when we will be discussing using games and simulations in training with Kent State facilitator Ned Parks. During this webinar, we will discuss the differences between games and simulations and which, if either, is better and whether you can build your own. For those attending live, you will be asked to complete a short survey. Please complete this survey so that we can be assured that we are bringing you the most usable and relevant content possible. You will also receive a follow-up email with a link to view today's recording. On behalf of Kent State's Center for Corporate and Professional Development and our facilitator, Christy Frieden, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.